This customer ordered the Ralph Lauren baby shower cake, and here's just the behind the scenes of everything I prep before I start decorating. I start off with the bottom tier first, adding that edible image to the base, and these have a very thin layer of white fondant behind them. I match the seams as best as I can, but it really doesn't matter since they are going to be covered. Once all the sheets are placed, I just cut off the excess with a pair of scissors. And then I add that top piece of fondant that you saw in the beginning I had already cut to size. This is supposed to be a cylinder box, so now we're going into adding all of those details to really bring it to life. Adding a strip of fondant towards the bottom and on the top that already has this stitching pattern onto it. Here is where we're covering all of those little seams with these little strips of fondant that also already have that stitching pattern on them as well. Once every seam was covered, I add the handle that goes in front of the cake, and having all of these details already prepped makes this 100 times easier. I like every cake to be unique, so for this one, I decided to go with these little button details. I used vodka and edible gold luster dust to make them this gold color. I then add the little tag that goes on the handle with what she requested it to say. And finally, this bottom tier is all complete. To make sure the top tier is center, I place this 6-inch round cake board on top and just mark out where it's gonna sit. I add a little bit of frosting between the layers just to act as a glue in some way, and then pick up that top tier using paper towels so I don't leave my fingerprints all over it. There's different ways to stack the cake, and for me personally, I like adding the support dowel after everything's already stacked. And that does go through both tiers. I covered the top tier in this fondant that has an imprint of knitting. Allowing the fondant to sit on the counter for a few minutes also makes it a lot easier to handle. Now, this cake is very similar to the other cakes that I made of this theme, but there is very minor differences. Like for this one, I added a border not only on the top, but also the bottom. I then add all of the little strips that go on the knitting part of this cake to give it a lot more contrast and detail. I used a silicone mold and fondant to make this little rocking horse. I also made the bow on the exact same day, so it's going to be very stiff. But I did this intentionally so that way it doesn't sag at all. I made it into 3 pieces so it's just a lot easier to handle. And here you can just see how stiff it is. Once I had that where I wanted, the last detail was to add this little teddy bear that I made out of Rice Krispies and fondant. Since it is a little heavy, I don't want it to sink into the cake, so I use a straw to support it, which just gets hidden underneath him. At this point I realized I didn't like how long the bow was, so I just trimmed it. And finally, here's that final cake. Still the same design, just a little different.